I'm Cindy Hsu, and joining me now is clinical psychologist Dr. Jamie Howard with the Child Mind Institute. Doctor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tough time for all of us right now with the latest news on the shooting. And as a parent, so many parents are wondering, how do you talk to your kids about it?
Mhm. It's so challenging and it doesn't get any easier. And so, what you want to try to do is to take a breath before you talk with your children, because just as important as the content of what you say is your tone of voice and what we call your affect, which is sort of the way that you express emotions on your face when you're giving the message. So, you want to take a few deep breaths and try to appear calm and in control. It's okay to appear sad. This is incredibly sad. And it's also incredibly frustrating that this keeps happening. It's just that you want to keep your emotions within a range that doesn't overwhelm or scare your children.
And now, I guess, it depends on how old the child is. As far as how you're going to handle this for the younger children, what do you even say?
So for the younger children, you can do anything from saying very little to explaining everything that happened. It sort of depends on what they're going to hear at school, if they have older siblings, if they happen to be close to Nashville. So sort of depending on your personal circumstance, you can tell your child something like, um, someone came into a school who was, naughty or a bad person, or they did a bad thing and they hurt some people, and I want you to know that you're safe. So this is what feels really tricky, is reassuring our children about their safety. And even though it feels like this is happening constantly, and it is happening way too much, it actually still is a low probability event. So chances are very, very, very good that this will never happen to your child. Still, we all have our rightful anger that this keeps happening, but it would be okay for you to reassure your child. And you can give sort of concrete examples. That's why we have locks on our doors at school, and the grown-ups have to show their ID before they enter. And that's why you practice safety drills. So you really want to give them a sense of what makes them safe and what they can do to keep themselves safe.
What are some don'ts when you're talking to your child? And also, at what age do you definitely say something, or do you always say something?
I think, with preschoolers, I don't think you have to say something. With kindergartners, it depends if they have older siblings. I think, though, once you're into first, second, third grade, for sure, the middle of elementary school, a lot of kids are going to hear about it on the bus or from siblings or siblings' friends. And you want to be the one to deliver this information to them, not other kids, because it can sound much scarier when it comes from a more sensational sort of source, or from someone who's not fully informed. And kids need to hear this information while feeling loved and supported and safe. So for older kids, for those, say, third grade and up, we say what happened. Someone was really angry, and we don't really know the motive why, but I think for this shooter, it may be a person who identified as he. So you can, get the details right, and say this person was very angry and upset and did something terrible, and this is what happened. Three children were killed and three grown-ups were killed. And I feel really sad and angry about that. What do you think about that? Invite a conversation. You can still reassure children, even high schoolers who seem like they've got it under control. They could still benefit from that reassurance that this remains low probability, and there are some things you can do. Keep an eye out for what we think of as disenfranchised students who seem to be on their own or struggling, because not only because they might be dangerous, because the vast majority are not, but because these are the kids who seem to be the most sort of prone to struggles and acting out.
Are there things that you should not do when you're having this conversation with the child?
I would try not to express too much emotion or get into too much of a grown up rant about, for example, gun laws and safety. because that can be overwhelming, right? So it's not that you're not allowed to feel sad and angry. You are, and that's fine for kids to see that. It's when it appears out of control that's very unsettling. And you always want to start with a little bit of information and then provide more if they ask. But a lot of times kids only need a little bit. And so you give a little bit of information, pause, see how they assess how they're reacting, if they want more, and maybe you just stop, or maybe you give a little more and then pause again. You don't want to jump in and give the whole lengthy, kind of gruesome, detailed event if they don't need it and don't want it.
What do you say if the child asks, why did they do it?
I would say the truth, which is that is a very complicated question and it's an important one for us to figure out. And I don't know yet why this person did it. My understanding was there was a feeling of being disgruntled, or and this may have been retribution. So maybe this person felt that they were mistreated, and so they're acting out in this way, which is never what we want to do. And then it opens up a conversation. What could you do instead? If you were feeling upset, if people were bullying you, if you didn't agree with the rules of a school that you were at.
What do you do if you notice your child is anxious about what has happened after you've had that initial conversation? Sometimes it could take days or a week and you see something.
So I would give them extra comfort, sort of more hugs, a little more time at bedtime together. That tends to be a vulnerable, difficult time for kids. And I would reach out to your child's teacher or teachers and the school psychologist so that it can be a community effort to support your child and to reassure them of their safety and to have more grown up eyes checking in. For kids, that's really what they respond best to, is a sense that the grown ups around them are motivated and competent to keep them safe.
Do you find there's a certain place or time that's good to have these conversations?
So I tend to say not right before bed because again that's a vulnerable time and we want kids to be able to fall asleep without their mind sort of going with all sorts of questions and thoughts. So dinner time could be a good time when you're all seated together and it's sort of a stable time within the family routine potentially. Um, just not too close to bedtime.
You and I had talked about, there's so many images coming out of what happened in Nashville, and one that is really touches everyone's heart is the one of the little girl she's in a bus and she has her hand on the window and she's being taken away from the scene. And my understanding is that by the time the bus got to its destination, the kids were singing on the bus. What does that tell you about children's resilience?
So I think that was a brilliant idea. Whoever, I imagine there was a grown up on the bus that suggested that, and that was such an effective strategy because what we want to do is help people right after trauma to not necessarily deeply encode and remember the traumatic details of what happened, and we want to get them sort of focused on their safety in the present moment. So to be singing helps accomplish that in such a developmentally appropriate way. Not to mention, singing requires belly breathing, and we know that that kind of slow, steady breathing can be very calming.
Any final thoughts that you have on the issue of talking to your kids about this shooting or any traumatic thing that unfortunately comes up in the news very often?
So, what I think for older children is we want to start to engage them more and help them to feel part of the conversation and part of the planning. How can we decrease the likelihood of this happening again? How can we make this better? And they're the next generation. Their voice is important. They've grown up with this. And that can be very empowering for them as well to feel like they have a say and they can brainstorm some ways to keep themselves and their peers safe.
So to have that conversation with them, with this conversation about what's happened.
Yeah, so to explain what happened and then say, what do you think, this is happening too much? You're a junior in high school now. You've grown up with this happening. What should we be doing? What should schools be doing? We need to get the message out. We should tell your guidance counselor about that. We should tell your principal about that. That's a really good idea. These kind of empowering strategies to help them feel like their voice matters because it does. They're in this unique position to understand the culture of their school and yet they aren't often asked. It's always the grown-ups who are the ones who are coming up with strategies. They can relate.
You know, I just thought of another question. Very often parents might be talking about this and getting very upset with, let's say, another parent or friends, not realizing the child is in the room. What do we need to keep in mind?
Well, to the extent that you can, try to make sure you're out of earshot. It's totally fine and actually helpful to get very upset and, commiserate with friends and other adults. I mean, whatever we need to do to cope is important. You just don't want your kids to hear you sounding kind of out of control, because then they really look to you. This is called social referencing. They vibe off of you. So if my mom seems terrified and horrified, then I should be too. And we don't want that for them. We want them to feel like they're going to be safe and protected.
And I keep thinking of new questions. You know, sometimes kids are very affected by this. At what point do you think that you need to look into professional help?
Yeah, so we usually think of functional impairment as the indicator. And what that means is kids have a few jobs to go to school and do the best they can to make and keep friends, to love their families, to figure out what kinds of activities they're good at that they enjoy. And when they stop doing one or more of those important jobs that they have, that's when we think, okay, this might be really affecting them more broadly. And it never hurts to get an assessment. The worst that happens is a clinician will say, this doesn't really rise to the level of disorder, but these are some things I recommend that you do in the meantime, and come back and let me know how she's doing in time.
All right, Dr. Jamie Howard, thank you so much. Such important information. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.